So I hope everyone enjoyed lunch. We're going to get started again. Speaking of middle school, as former middle school teachers, we noticed that the front tables are very empty, and we're wondering if assigned seats were necessary. Just kidding. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Van Hover. I'm in secondary social studies education, and I'm a former middle school teacher, and it's my pleasure to chair the panel, Developmentally Informing Curricula and Teaching. I'm going to give a brief biography of each speaker, and then we're going to enjoy their talking about this interesting topic. Our first presenter is going to be Jay Giedd. He is board certified in general, child, adolescent, and geriatric psychiatry and serves as the chief of the unit on brain imaging in the child psychiatry branch at the NIMH. His research focuses on the biological basis of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral disorders and disorders of childhood onset. Next, we'll have Penny Bishop, who's a professor of middle-level education and director of the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education at the University of Vermont. A former middle school English and social studies teacher, she teaches future and current middle and grades educators and conducts research on schooling for young adolescents. And last, we'll have Vincent Anfara, who's a professor and department head of educational leadership and policy studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Before entering the professorate, he taught for 23 years in both middle and high school in Louisiana and New Mexico. His research interests focus on middle school reform, school improvement planning, leadership in middle schools, and issues related to student achievement. And without further ado, we're going to start with Jay.
So I have a great honor and pleasure for me to be here, and as sort of a newcomer to the education science, but my passion is longstanding, and I'm really looking forward to interacting with as many of you as I can. I had a great lunch to talk about some in the trenches sort of themes, but I'm going to focus on the biology of the middle school brain. And teen brain is a topic I often talk about, and when I tell people what I do and say, oh, I study the teen brain, or I'm going to talk about the teen brain, I get this sort of unsolicited feedback that it'll be a very short talk. You mean they found one? A contradiction of terms, or along this theme of search for the elusive, that my next talk will be on the Loch Ness Monster. But what I hope to convey is that not only do teens have brains, which we can now for the first time, look in the living, growing brain without using radiation in a safe way. And the most fundamental thing that we found is that the teen brain is doing just fine. It's not a broken or defective adult brain. It's different. It's different than children. It's different than adult brains, but it's in no way defective or broken. These are the big three behavioral changes that you see from adolescence and because of the brain changes. And I think these are really fundamentally rooted because it's not just humans. All social mammals also exhibit these same three changes: increased risk-taking, sensation-seeking, and they move away from parents toward peers. And I think it's because it's worked, and not sort of a moral component to it. It just worked better for us to mix up our DNA and our genes. Why do we leave comfort and safety of our home? Our parents feed us, a place to stay. I mean, it's kind of in some ways almost an irrational decision to ever leave. But these give us a nudge to do that, and it served our species well. I don't know how many of you had a chance to see this, close to where I am in D.C. at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, the Hall of Human Origins. And it's a great exhibit overall, but what really caught my eye was this kind of side panel that wasn't particularly featured. And it looks at how the human brain changed a lot over the last about 800,000 years, and linking it to climate change. But the key here, and this is sort of subtle, so I'll say it a couple different ways, but that what drove the increase in brain size wasn't the harshness of the climate, it was the change itself. And before seeing this, I was thinking, wow, Ice Age, things got really tough. Only the most clever could make it and survive, find food when food is scarce and really make it. And so this is subtly different. It's our ancestors of everybody in this room, their brains were able to change and adapt to the environment. Much better than Neanderthals, who were very robust. Their brains were actually bigger than us. They survived in even harsher climates. But their tool use, and they didn't change much in 2 million years. And so what is the key aspect of our species is this changeability and being able to do it for a very long time. So Neanderthals were sort of out and about probably around age 9 or 10. They tell us from dental records from the fossil sites and such. So somewhere around 500,000 to 800,000 years ago, teenagers were invented in terms of this second decade where we're still at home. And it's not a slam dunk. I mean, we pay for that. I mean, we're dependent upon our parents for the first several months of our life exclusively. Literally, we would die. But taking it in the second decade is weird, as a species. It's a very long time to still need protection, to need help to stay alive. And so there is a cost. The benefit, though, is we don't have to lock and load. Our brain can keep options open way longer than any other species. And we can live on the North Pole. We can live on the equator. We can live everywhere in between. We can even live in outer space for a while with the technologies that our brains have developed. So this notion is more than any other aspect, I think, really the key to my entire research career in terms of this adolescent period of the second decade of life built to change. It creates enormous opportunities, particularly in the education realm, but it also creates vulnerabilities. And it's these trade-offs. So one of the big changes that our brains are facing is this digital revolution. And it's very abrupt. So the way that we learn and the way that we play, the way that we interact with each other has changed more in the last 15 years than in the previous 570 since Gutenberg's popularization of the printing press. So it's really a kind of an exciting time for adolescent brain research in terms of the amount of screen time, the amount of just awake hours that we're interfacing with digital technologies. It's unprecedented. And what I hope to hear from people in this room and following up later is what are the teachers seeing in the classroom, what are parents seeing, what are people seeing of the impact of this on the brain. So I won't be able to go into too many details, but for those interested, this just came out like three weeks ago. I tried to explore some of the impact of digital interface, screen time of these on learning, play, and interaction. But particularly, all of us. It's actually a surprising number of adults and any age group play video games and interact. But I think adolescents particularly, because they can master this stuff, right? In humbling ways. For those, I have four people, kids in the second decade now, and they grew up with it, and so digital natives, they're quite facile. They can do it, and they're young enough to embrace the change. So I think that they are really ground zero for a lot of these effects. And so people worry about it. It ain't natural in terms of much of our brain evolution was to get along with other people, to be part of a society. We used to kind of do these talks on the social brain. And we kind of realized it's the whole brain. The biggest predictor of how big a brain is for any of the primates is how big is its social group. And so most of the brain is social. And if you have 834 Facebook friends, which is the average now, you can't really see them, you can't smell them, you can't touch them, it's not really face to face. But it is more of them. Are we losing something in the subtleties of human interaction? Are we losing something in terms of impatience, in terms of the great thing about Google and the internet and things, you can find out almost any fact or figure in moments. You don't have to wait for in the newspaper or a text book to come out. Very immediacy. And people worry, well, that's good in some ways, but are we creating a habit of sort of not sticking to it, not digging deep, mile wide, inch deep, or is there some price that we're paying for people to do this? And I don't know. So these are genuine, non-rhetorical questions for people who are actually in the trenches with middle school students. The other aspect, I guess, of that is that reading's not natural either, in terms of the default. So reading is only about 5,100 years old. And so most humans that have lived and died have never read a single word. Humans have been around about 6 million years. And so there's, language is much older, but reading per se as well. So people kind of say, well, these new technologies, they aren't natural, they're against nature. But 10,000 years ago, that's a blink of an eye. But hunting, gathering berries, and now a lot of us spend a lot of our waking hours with digital devices, with symbols, with words, and so it's really kind of this great immovable force versus irresolute object kind of thing. This highly adaptable, changeable brain, but now it's faced with one of the biggest changes in our history. So the way I try to get a handle on this is fairly non-creative, but people come to my lab. We're now looking from the womb through the 90s, but come back every 2 years, and we scan their brain, and then we see how they're doing in school, how they're doing with relationships. We study their genes. So we're just trying to put it all together. And this is the bottom line. And again, I think I'm not sure how many slides there are in this, like 156 or something. So that was a lot, 15 minutes. So they'll be on the website or available to everybody. So I'm kind of skipping to the punchline. So the brain grows not by getting bigger and bigger. By first grade, by age 6, it's already 93% of adult size. Your head gets bigger, that's the bones. So the actual brain gets smaller after age 12. So it doesn't, and people say, brain growth or brain maturation. The brain matures by becoming more connected amongst itself, and that might come up more in discussions. So that's one thing we can measure with the new imaging technologies, the different components of the brain communicating with each other, and by becoming more specialized. And it specializes in what we ask of it. And what we ask of it is largely our education system. We're creating an environment that this brain adapts to based on what we have the students doing. And so it's a very powerful opportunity and responsibility because we're just sort of scratching the surface of this. Some of the movies I'll include as well, which are like some of the incredible, particularly spatial memory things that 10, 11, 12-year-old students can do if we learn how to harness the brain's potential, which is really fun to really kind of try to work not just in one direction, but to go from the labs to the schools to the homes, back and forth, to really see if we can identify how do we change the brain in the most effective ways. Everything we do changes the brain, every thought we have, every moment of the day. But how can we understand this well enough to harness it and really kind of do these things on purpose? And so the different parts of the brain are like letters of the alphabet. And as we go from a baby to a child to middle school or to adult, what happens is these letters then get combined into words. And the words into sentences, and the sentences into paragraphs. It's a fairly new way of thinking the last 2-3 years. And so we used to say like, oh, here's the hippocampus. This is the part of your brain that's involved in memory. And this is a part of the brain involved in controlling impulses. And that's sort of not the way to think of it anymore. The parts of the brain may be like vowels. They're in lots of different words, lots of different sentences. One of the parts of the brain that's very late to mature, not till actually 25 to 30, is the prefrontal cortex. So it's right behind our forehead. That's the latest to evolve, the latest to mature, and it ties together all of our memories from the past, all of our hopes and dreams for the future, everything that's happening at this moment to guide our decisions. And it's not gone, but it's not as good as it's going to get till about 25. And this, I think, does underlie a lot of the behaviors and frustrations we might have with adolescence in terms of that this is a work in progress. But again, it's as it should be. If it was already locked and loaded by age 10, we wouldn't be sitting here. We need to have this brain that can adapt. And so almost everything that could show about the brain can be seen as good or bad depending on context. So this is involved in long-range planning, of running hypotheticals in our mind. The philosopher Popper said, our hypotheses die in our stead, which means we can wonder what would happen if we try to do the skateboard jump and don't quite make it. We can do these scenarios in our head instead of in the physical world. And as you go from age 10 to 12 to 14, you get better and better that you can run more scenarios in the safety of your mind. So as you see, the bluing is maturation. And so this is the part of the brain that I'm talking about here, which doesn't turn blue until about age 25. A couple of years earlier in girls, lots of individual variation. It's also the part of the brain that's involved in multitasking, which is the big other change with the digital revolution. So not only are people doing 9, 10 hours a day of screen time, a third of the time they're multitasking. And again, is that good or bad? I'm not sure. So I'll hear from teachers and stuff of whether they're seeing this as just rarely happens, it happens a lot, whether it's good or bad. That front part of the brain, in terms of maturing late, it really can be conceptually used to look at so many of the features. So you're going to be thinking more in the here and the now. You're not going to be considering all of the past, all of the future, because that part of the brain is what's tying it all together. But the limbic systems, they really get ignited at puberty. You start thinking about sex a lot. You start thinking about peers, where you fit in that standing. You have more testosterone, aggression goes up. So you have all of these changes that are igniting around puberty, and do the math, like 10, 11 years before the part of the brain that helps you really keep that in check becomes fully mature. Well, it actually never becomes fully mature, but that's a long gap. I mean, that's what makes this time when you should be at the top of your game one of the most dangerous. So your reflexes are best, your tolerance to heat and cold, resistance to cancer, strength, agility, almost everything you measure, you should be at the top of your game. Morbidity, mortality go up 300%. Number one by far, car accidents. If you're a teenage girl and you die, half the time it's a car accident. Staggering. Nothing else is even double digits. I think prostate cancer, men between 80 and 90 is like 9%. But that's staggering. In terms of 2 and 3 are suicide or homicide, depending on how you classify the different events. But all the top 10 seem to be related to judgment, decision-making, emotion. So the key is this notion, I guess, of not bashing teens. In terms of almost every time that I tell people I do, it's almost a given. There'll be sort of a snide comment, or people think that middle school brains are somehow defective or incapable of learning the way that we want them to. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. We have to look at this middle school brain as incredibly adaptable. It's gonna specialize in what we ask of it, and that specialization could be 89, maybe the science keeps moving forward, maybe 100 years more of their life. So it's a wonderful opportunity and a huge responsibility then for specializing these brains. So I'm going to stop there with those themes, but look forward to the rest of the panel and questions throughout today and tomorrow as well. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Penny's talk.
I'm breaking. Can you all hear me? No? Can you hear me now? Yeah? I'm breaking ranks a little bit because I'm sure I can't be as graceful as everyone else has been in terms of turning around at the same time. So I think this seat might okay, I think this seat might serve me better and therefore serve you better. So first of all, let me thank the Youth-Nex Center for the invitation to be here today. I think it's a terrific transdisciplinary opportunity to promote positive youth development, and I, for one, never get enough opportunities to talk with folks outside of my field with a similar focus. So I'm grateful to be here, and also grateful for the warmer weather. It's not quite as lovely in Vermont right now. We actually have already had snow flurries in the air. Stephanie graciously introduced us earlier, and I guess the only thing that I would add to that that's relevant for today is that I'm a mother of two middle school aged boys, 12 and 14, and that's probably my most important street cred that I can offer to you at the moment. One of whom really dislikes school, of course, because both of his parents are educators. That's the way it goes. In preparation for today, we were asked to consider how we might incorporate developmental transitions into curriculum and teaching in such a way that we might meet student needs. And of course, as we think about developmental transitions, various frameworks have informed our collective understanding of early adolescence over the decades. Some have asserted stage theories of development, such as Kohlberg or Piaget, Erikson. Others have grappled with it more holistically, thinking about the age span, such as Charity James's work on the educational needs of young adolescents, which she described as simultaneously existing polarities. And then the work of Stevenson and his identification of 5 basics of personal efficacy. Across these, there are, of course, similarities. Even more recently, we've watched the pendulum swing a bit, as we've watched scholars such as Lesko and Vogley call for a contingent and recursive perspective on young adolescents. In other words, viewing each student as a person who is in the here and now, rather than a person who is becoming. Perhaps most helpful, however, in contemporary school improvement has been Eccles and Midgley's concept of fit or match, the implications of which, of course, we heard earlier today when Dr. Eccles spoke to us. They propose, and evidence supports, of course, that the motivational and behavioral declines seen so often in these middle grades may stem from a lack of appropriate educational environments for early adolescence. They note, for example, and here I quote, "Environmental changes often associated with the transition to junior high school seem especially harmful. They decrease decision-making and choice at a time when the desire for control is growing, and they disrupt social networks at a time when adolescents are especially concerned with peer relationships." What I ask us to consider at this point in the day, then, is what constitutes fit for young adolescents in the 21st century? What constitutes fit for young adolescents in this digital world in which we now live? To consider fit without considering the increasing role of technology in contemporary society is to do an injustice to the growing social and cultural context in which today's students live. Over the past 7 years, I've worked with colleagues at the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education to examine the increasing role of technology in young adolescents' motivation and engagement needs. We've focused particularly on student learning in one-to-one contexts, that is, schools or teams that provide one internet-accessible device per student, such as a laptop, a tablet, netbook, that sort of thing. Whether today's youth are called digital natives or the net generation, now more than ever there's this gap, I think someone earlier called it a chasm, in fact, between students in school and out of school lives. Of course, we can't generalize about them as a population. It's sort of the whole point, really. But what does their behavior tell us about their engagement preferences? I'm sure I don't need to tell this crowd that we're living in an era of exponential growth in terms of information and communication technology. You can see from these stats from 2010 that young adolescents demonstrate a particular affinity for these tools. It's precisely during these middle school years that technology use skyrockets for kids. You can see 230% increase between the ages of 8 and 10 to the next grade level, or the age range up. So these learners have grown accustomed to flashy, high-definition graphics, constant multitasking, and the excitement of gaming. Research suggests that they connect with graphics before text, learn well through trial and error, process information quickly, and expect relevance in their learning. Currently, 40 states have some form of virtual schools, and while there were almost 2 million enrollments in distance education courses in K-12 school districts in 2010, the most common location, at 92%, for students accessing their online courses is their school. Clearly, then, schools are key conduits and potential change agents in meeting the net generation where they're at, and more importantly, where they learn. Yet why are they so attracted to these technologies? Certainly at first, the novelty of technology plays a role. But while the novelty factor wears off, many young adolescents continue to identify technology as a motivator in their learning. I posit that this affinity stems from the fact that these tools meet many adolescent, and for that matter, many human needs. Rather than sharing the results of a specific research study from our institute with you today, I thought I'd present 3 students' perspectives on how teachers are currently integrating technology in ways that meet their students' needs. Let's take young adolescents' need for belonging and affiliation, for example. Here we have one student's perspective on a classroom task that really worked for her. Through online collaboration, this student has opportunities that align not only with the increasing peer orientation that we see at this age, but also with the focus on text complexity that was the goal of the lesson. Collaborative environments are an efficient way for students to work together, whether the groups are composed of students in the same physical class or not. As we look at the need for a sense of competence and mastery, this young adolescent here explains how learning management systems, the one adopted by his team of teachers in particular, provides him with immediate and autonomous access to information, to class notes, readings, assignments, and the like. He can rely on this digital tool to ensure that he feels caught up and academically competent. Furthermore, the learning management system enables teachers to generate learning analytics at the touch of a button, helping them to further personalize and differentiate for future lessons, as well as help surface early signals that a student might be struggling. And third, young adolescents often desire greater autonomy than previously in their lives. Here, a student explains the strong sense of responsibility she feels from the trust instilled in her to manage a potentially worldwide audience. The need for oversight of expensive hardware stems from the fact that she and her peers bring laptops home each night. This 24/7 model both enhances in-class learning experiences and extends learning beyond the school day. I'll just a side note that when interviewing these kids in particular, the idea of having potentially thousands of people, some of them were certain it might even reach millions, that there were so many people that might be interested in what they have to say, which I thought was terrifically young adolescent in and of itself. So whether it's building toward autonomy, belonging, or competence, we all know that the challenges of developmentally informing teaching and curriculum are substantial. Yet there are also encouraging opportunities. Important among them is that our students are themselves valuable sources of pedagogical knowledge. Unfortunately, we overlook students often as a means to thoughtfully inform school change. However, integrating technology to promote developmentally informed practices may in fact hinge on whether educators fully appreciate students as knowledgeable partners in the 21st century. In our research, students reveal an important capacity to examine technology use in the context of what they personally need in a learning environment. They envision ways to strike a helpful balance between emerging learning opportunities and those they found most effective in the past. And they demonstrate an ability to use technologies to improve standard activities. In collaboration with their students, I hope that teachers can capitalize on digital technologies without sacrificing the best of non-digital learning, as they work toward practices that provide a stronger fit between students' needs and the pedagogy that they encounter daily. So what's next? As of 2 years ago, 40% of the nation's school districts had at least one school that had adopted a one-to-one program. That number continues to increase dramatically. As we look toward the next 5 years, the 2012 Horizon report highlights emerging technologies in pre-K-12 schools, including those rapidly becoming familiar to us and those that stretch our imaginations. While we may find challenge today in navigating laptops, tablets, and the cloud, we can expect much more complexity tomorrow as young adolescents move on to adopt more challenging and nuanced technologies, and schools run to keep up. In summation, digital technologies are here to stay. In many ways, the middle grades are at a crossroad. These tools stretch out before us. As educators, we can choose to ignore them. We can choose to use them to replicate the same features of curriculum and teaching that currently fail to motivate and engage many students. Or we can take our cue from the young adolescents themselves and consider the powerful intersections between their developmental needs and what these digital tools have to offer. At the end of the day, Schlechte reminds us, quote, "If educators want to work hard and want students to work hard and be persistent, they must find ways of designing work that students believe to be worth doing." Developmentally informing curriculum and teaching, then, is less about designing engaging activities for students and more about unleashing the learning potential of young adolescents and their technologies. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit different of an approach to this and talk about the idea of fit that Dr. Eccles talked about this morning, the appropriate educational setting, specifically developmentally appropriate educational settings for young adolescents. With the decline of the junior high and the rise of the middle school, we saw a number of professional organizations offer suggestions as to what would characterize an exemplary middle school. On your tables, I believe you have two handouts or two sets of handouts. One of them is marked with the logo from the National Middle School Association, which is now called the Association of Middle Level Education. It's now AMLE. And I know Gail Andrews has done a revision of this. Hey, Gail. She's back there, one of the authors of Turning Points 2000. But I wanted you to see the consistency in the consistency here on this, we believe, and there is a 2010 version of that, Turning Points 2000, the National Forum's vision statement from 2003, and Breaking Ranks in the Middle, which first came out in 2006. I want you to see the fact that from different philosophical, ideological, and political positions, a very consistent collection or set of ideas came out as to what constituted the effective and good middle school. Interdisciplinary teaming, small learning communities, flexible scheduling, advisory programs, an emphasis on developmentally appropriate curriculum and instruction and assessment. Now, if we were to go back in time, and I could take you on a history lesson of sorts, in 1975, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development issued the middle school we need. It's quite a few years ago, 1975. The National Middle School Association, remember I've said now it's AMLE, issued its very first position statement, which was this, we believe, in 1982. And brain periodization, we learned a little bit this morning or this afternoon about the brain and the development of the brain. But brain periodization was certainly a theory that was promoted, or I should say at least mentioned, in the version of this, we believe, that came out in 1982. The National Association of Secondary School Principals issued in 1985 an agenda for excellence at the middle level. And of course, Carnegie came out with Turning Points, the original Turning Points in 1989, which it came out with and said what needed to be involved in the establishment of an effective middle school. More than 30 years later, for some of these, it's 40 years later, we're finding that that consistent set of recommendations is still there. You can look at the handout that I provided for you, and you can see curriculum is relevant, challenging, integrative, exploratory, and it's across all of the organizations and all of the documents. You can look at instruction, and what should strike you about instruction is that there should be multiple learning and teaching approaches that are varied in the nature. The teacher should not rely on one particular instructional strategy or the other to do 95% of the instruction in a middle school classroom. But I wanted you to see that. The second thing I wanted you to see is on your tables you have a list of the developmental characteristics of early adolescence that are divided out by intellectual development, physical development, emotional, psychological development, social development, and moral, ethical development. So you see a long list there, basically front and back of a page or 2 pages of characteristics that are common to 10 to 14 years, students that are 10 to 14 years of age. But in fact, there's a great variance in where you are with your thinking at 10 and where somebody else at the age of 10 is in their thinking or physical development or moral development or whatever it might be. I wanted you to see those things just to be aware of them, and just in case for some reason you've not seen them. Now, what's the definition? It's a crude definition, I admit, but it refers to the use of young adolescent developmental characteristics, which you have a listing of there, in creating educational environments, as well as curriculum, instruction, and assessment that are responsive to the developmental characteristics of the student. It's providing an education that is appropriate for that student at that age. So I just want you to be aware of that. Now, if we were to look at the intellectual development of the student, the implication is that there should be a wide variety of teaching approaches or strategies or materials for instruction, as well as physical movement about the classroom, as well as small group discussion. There should be curricula organized around real-life concepts. There should be organized discussions in peer groups to facilitate the student's understanding of the subject matter that's being taught and hopefully learned. And there should be encouragement of self-expression in all subjects. Now, I work with preparing principals for our schools, and I'm not proud to say that we have moved to a generic certification in that there's no longer an elementary or secondary certification. There are very few states that offer a middle-level certification in the principalship. But if a principal were to walk into that teacher's classroom and see those kinds of things going, I'm not sure she or he would understand that what's being done is developmentally appropriate for the intellectual development of the young adolescent. Hopefully I'm making my point there. If we look at the physical development of the young adolescent, we see, once again, a health and science curriculum that emphasizes self-understanding about changes in the body, but what's going on with them as they mature physically and grow physically. We know it sounds rather stupid or rather silly, but advising parents that their students get the appropriate rest that they need in order to be the most effective at school that they can be. Providing opportunities for daily exercise. We've seen a lot with the school systems lately that no longer provide physical education or whatever classes for their students. We see encouragement of hands-on learning, and we also see schools that are concerned about the developmental characteristics of the young adolescent providing snacks to satisfy between meal hunger, as well as to provide nutritional guidance for the students as to what is appropriate and what is not appropriate by way of a snack. On the emotional psychological side, we encourage, or we should be encouraging, self-assessment. I don't know when I've last been in a middle school classroom, and I'm embarrassed to say that. I'm sure there are schools like our Schools to Watch schools and our breakthrough schools that are encouraging self-assessment, but I don't see that a lot in the middle schools in the area from which I come, which is Knoxville, Tennessee. There's not a lot of encouragement for self-assessment. The teacher does the assessment, not the student, or not other students. The activity should be designed to allow students to play out their emotions. You know, they're going through a lot of changes in their life at this point in time, and they need the opportunity in a safe environment to play out the emotions that they're feeling, the emotions that they're experiencing. We should not, as adults in schools, be forcing kids to explain their emotions. You know, we should be valuing them, and we should be encouraging them to feel these emotions, but not necessarily to justify them or to explain them. They should be meeting with frequent success. And that doesn't mean, you know, with some teachers' conception of frequent success. I was just in a school about 3 weeks ago, and this particular teacher's belief about frequent success is that the teacher kept on changing the multiple choice test simply by changing the items around so the students would pass the test. That's not what's meant by that necessarily, but they should be experiencing success in their endeavors in middle school. They should be allowed opportunities to release their emotional stress, and they should be doing readings that deal with topics that are similar to their own, so that they can see that they're not alone in the trajectory that they're taking on this particular growth pattern. Now, with moral and ethical implications, we should have opportunities for students to examine their own behavior, to accept responsibility in setting standards for behavior, and helping them develop values when solving their problems. These are all big ticket items, but they're very important items. And then I believe, lastly, the social development implications. We should be scheduling debates and plays and other activities which allow students to show off in productive ways. They should be engaged in role-playing. They should be fostering the teachers, the adults should be fostering peer teaching and community service projects, which have become very, very big in certain middle schools. And there should be, and I apologize for the misspelling here, there should be planning of large group activities rather than boy-girl events. Intramurals can be scheduled so that the students can interact with friends of the same as well as friends of the opposite sex. Just by way of conclusion of this, and I have one more point I want to make, young adolescents differ in many ways. And, you know, we've gone through them, their physical characteristics, their interests, their home life, their intellectual abilities, their learning capacity, their language skills. They differ in tremendously different ways. And it's a period of tremendous variability, which we as educators need to recognize and need to, in our own ways, encourage and grow. Now, I just completed a study in Tennessee with some of my doctoral students, and I've done the same study in Pennsylvania, I've done the same study in Georgia, I've done the same study in Louisiana, and I'll be honest with you, and I'm not trying to bash schools. I was a teacher for 18 years before I went into higher education, and I love working in a middle school. I was an administrator of a middle school, and I absolutely love working with that age group of students. But we just finished a study, and the study was in 5 middle schools in Tennessee. And as I said, we've been in other states doing similar things. And what we're finding is that we're not seeing the peer tutoring, we're not seeing the advisory programs, we're not seeing the interdisciplinary units, we're not seeing the team teaching, the thematic units, the peer teaching, the service learning. We're not seeing those sorts of things in a lot of the middle schools that exist. To qualify my statements, we have breakthrough schools, we have schools to watch schools that are doing excellent jobs, and we have some pockets of really exemplary middle schools out there, and I congratulate people for that, and I wish it continues and it grows. But what we're seeing is, unfortunately, through our observations, through our interviews, and through the data that we collect, we're seeing about 15 to 25 minutes of direct instruction where the teacher feels she or he has control over the subject matter. I have a comment by a teacher who's an 8th grade math teacher who is a male, who said, "I still believe direct instruction is by far the best tool to get kids to produce, because the more we say it, the more they go over it, the more familiar they will be with it, and the more and better they'll learn it." Now, obviously, that particular teacher, I'm not trying to teacher bash here, but obviously that teacher doesn't know much about learning theory, and the student has to be an active participant in the learning process, and to sit there and to absorb knowledge that the teacher gives out and fills up, like John Locke talked about as tabula rasa, is just a foolish idea. But we're finding a context in which teachers are very concerned about covering the standards. This is pre-Common Core sort of stuff, and we need to continue our investigations and our research after Common Core has taken hold in the schools. But they're concerned about reaching the standards, about meeting the standards, about kids scoring well on these high-stake tests that they're taking, and they believe if they cover the material, the students will learn it. So there's about 15 to 25 minutes, and it doesn't matter. It's social studies, it's math, it's science, it's language arts. And if I've forgotten any of the core content areas, please forgive me. But it's the core content areas that we went into and observed. We have thousands of observations of teachers. And what we're finding is there's this direct instruction followed by student drill and skill seat work with varying levels of teacher disengagement or engagement with their class. Even with us in the classroom, it was very common, and I will say it again, it was very common to find teachers go sit at their desk and to enter grades into their grade book or grade assignments that had been turned in, and only raise their heads when the noise level in the classroom got a little bit too loud. So we're not finding the varied instructional strategies. We're not finding the implications across the developmental characteristics that I discussed. We're not finding that in the typical middle schools. And for me, that's a big disappointment. So when I do see a truly exemplary middle school, I'm very excited about it and I'm very proud of it, and I hope it spreads. But it's not spreading. I will tell you one thing, it's not spreading in the 3 counties that surround my university. And this also goes for in Louisiana, in Pennsylvania, in areas that I've gone in Pennsylvania and in Georgia. And I've talked to people who are principals in Oregon who are saying sort of the same thing. There's a lot of direct instruction going on in the classrooms. What do we need to be focused on? We need to be focused on, as I said earlier, the professional development of these teachers. Tennessee is a state that now has had middle school certification for about 6 or 7 years. And we need, more importantly than the professional development, that's an important component, we need to be focused on the culture and climate of these schools. I can teach all day long about advisory programs and thematic units and about varying instructional strategies. But when a new teacher goes to a school and is told, this is the way we do things around here, it's very hard to fight that culture of, and I'll end with the comment from a woman who was a 7th grade language arts teacher. And she said, we asked her what was meant by the term. We were having a hard time in the interview. And we asked her what she thought we meant by instructional strategies. So a woman had been teaching for about 12 years. And she said, instructional strategies, I like these words because I really don't know what any of them mean. That scares me a little bit. And I know I've given kind of a one-sided picture of things here, but it's more common than we'd like to admit. Thank you.
Thank you. Our speakers have given us a lot to think about. I love the context of thinking about how the brain works and then thinking about how we fit developmentally appropriate curriculum to the middle school learner. I'd like to open it up for questions. Please be sure to identify yourself before you ask a question so we get to know each other. And if you can raise your hand while someone else is talking, we can make sure to distribute the mics appropriately. So, questions? Eileen, I think that's you in the back.
Yeah, just a quick question. I agree with what you just said about middle school classrooms and how many of them look. I remember really vividly transitioning from a 4th grade classroom to a 6th grade in a new county, and it took a week or two for them to tell me you don't have an overhead projector and to bring it to me and explain to me that I needed to change my model of instruction to be more fitting with that setting. And it was amazing because it was a school district where test scores were great and everyone was doing really well. But it seemed to me like it was either a city or a county or a state policy that sort of forced a certain style. As long as everyone's focus is on the test scores, that we're sort of stuck. And so I wondered your thoughts about levers of change to kind of get us out of that mode where that's the primary goal of our schools to something different. If you guys have suggestions or strategies about that.
I would just like to comment. I think it's a great question. Somebody said earlier, and I'm not sure, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was, but we know what we need to do. It's just the fact we need to do it. And I've been before many school boards who say, well, this sounds all fine and dandy, but to give teachers common planning time, to give them, this, that, and the other, to do what you're asking for takes more time. Their belief or their conception is it takes more time. But more importantly, their belief is that it takes more money to implement a truly effective middle school. And I don't disagree with them. I've had colleagues tell me it takes about 10 to 15% at a minimum more money. But I should say the school systems that I've run into, because it does not apply to all, but the school systems are not willing to support with the money and the resources that are needed and the additional teachers that are needed to truly do what we know is best for middle level education. We know what we need to be doing. We're just not doing it.
I'd love to add to that briefly. To provide some perspective, the schools that I work with primarily are in Vermont, and I think in some ways we're very fortunate there. We certainly have experienced the same struggles and stresses that are related to high stakes testing, but for whatever reason, we've been able to hold on to a fair amount of progressivism, if you will. So when I come to events such as this and hear my colleagues speak about the schools and the practices that one is seeing, I often feel a disconnect because that's not typically my experience. But that said, as far as strategies go for implementing that kind of change, Vermont is all about its local control. So every single school has its own school board. So you can just imagine the politics that are associated with that. I don't have any good guidance on that one, but what I would say is that Rhode Island has several things now. I don't know, is there anyone here from Rhode Island? So they're interesting in that they've got a couple of recent mandates that are, now in legislation. One is for teacher advisories, so all schools have those, and another has to do with common planning time. And I find it really interesting that they've been able to work it at that level of policy, because I don't know of any other examples in the states that one has done that. The other piece that I think has been, that perhaps I would suggest that's been helpful for us, is to really focus supports on the teachers in their first 3 or 4 years as they come right out of teacher education program. Vince mentioned earlier, I think, this idea that it's really hard for teachers to go into a more traditional system and buck that system, and I agree completely. A new teacher's got enough on his or her plate without trying to change the world at the same time. And they're all sort of sitting ducks for the apprenticeship of observation, as Lordy would say, in terms of teaching the way they've always been taught. And so we spend a lot of time in our teacher ed programs working to help them overcome that and to see a variety of ways in which they can be much more developmentally responsive. And then they go into those systems where they don't see that in practice. So stronger university teacher partnerships, particularly with their own alumni, and at those first 3, 4, 5 years is a crucial opportunity that we overlook. We have mentoring programs in schools, but those are mentors with the veteran teachers, between the new teacher and the veteran teacher. So you've got that traditional system replicated again. But thinking about those pieces, I think, is a really important way to go.
Thank you all. And that was Eileen Merritt from the University of Virginia. So make sure you introduce yourself. But back left.
Hi, I'm Judy Conk. I'm with the National Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades Reform. And one of the things that struck me in listening to you and trying to make connections to what I heard this morning was how we still kind of compartmentalize developmentally responsive education from intellectual development. And I was struck when Vince was talking about plays and debates as a social development piece. I'm struck by the research that I'm familiar with about the power of the arts to unleash learning, especially at the middle grades age, and not compartmentalize it into the plays that only the kids who are interested in plays go to, but rather in infusing those kinds of approaches and vehicles to learning the intellectual content along with the digital world that they're in, and putting it all together and having, I loved with what Jacqueline said this morning about having this individual look at what's the environment for a particular child. So I'm really struck about how we need to pay attention to this idea of not looking discretely, as we often study social development and the arts, but rather looking at the middle school student as an individual, and how do we combine those things all day long, not just after school, for the success of those learning goals that hopefully they're part of setting up for themselves.
Thanks for that interesting question. The short answer is I completely agree. And the slightly longer would simply be that I would extend that to also include the other aspects of students' identity, whether it's a class identity or sexual orientation, et cetera. I think often we get so far down the development road that we, in fact, forget about all the other really important pieces of identity development.
I really don't have anything to add to Penny's response, other than I applaud you for your understanding that we need that, and more middle schools need to be doing that. And you know, I've been to so many meetings lately where we talk about siloing things into their individual. We need to stop that, and we need to have the conversations, and we need to be doing what we should be doing by breaking down these silos that have been built. So I applaud what you've said, and I couldn't agree with you anymore.
We have a question.
Hello, my name is Dave Rogers, and I'm a local middle school principal here in Albemarle County. And I thank you all for being here today. I know this may be a little bit off topic, but as the topics develop, and I think tomorrow or later there will be another panel that will be discussing this, when we talk about learning the way or teaching the way I was taught and the pervasiveness and of that issue, and being trained one way and then moving into a workplace where we get retrained into the traditional manner, I wonder if you have thoughts around how we also translate the need for change in middle schools with the community at large, the parent body, for instance, and how do we communicate that out in a way that's persuasive and is supportive of this change for middle schools, because it does require more resources, as you noted earlier, and parents very often expect school to look pretty much like it did when they were in school too. Do you have thoughts around how we might forward that message and maybe the persuasiveness of
it? It's a great question. And I'm sorry, your name was David, is it? When I was in Pennsylvania, I was teaching at Temple University, and there was an innovative math program there that was based on real-life concepts for middle schools and for middle schoolers. And the program lasted about 6 months. And the program lasted about 6 months because the kids would go home with their math homework, and the parents didn't understand it. They couldn't help their kids, or at least that was the excuse. They couldn't help their kids, and they just it didn't look like math they had when they were in school. So man, they just screamed and yelled about it until the school system got rid of it. I think, you know, there's no easy answer to what you're asking, but I think we do need to convince parents in this country, as well as school boards, as well as superintendents, as well as principals, that they need to understand what developmentally appropriate is all about, what the middle school philosophy is all about, what's appropriate for this age of student. I've seen principals, and I was a principal, so I'm not bashing principals, but I've seen high school principals go into a middle school and within the matter of 2 months completely dismantle everything that smelt of or looked like middle school. So it became, in effect, a junior high, which was the jewel in the crown of the education system at the turn of the century, the 20th century. But I think we need to do and I don't know how we go about doing it. I think we need to do a much better job of educating parents that this is not fluff, this is not touchy-feely, this is not, let's have your student feel good, that we're providing a rigorous academic curriculum, that our instructional strategies are appropriate. I mean, when you have, yes, we have varying levels of teacher certification in this country, and some states have it and some don't, and some states have an endorsement, and some states have a certificate, and some are licensure, and some don't have anything. But I think we need to. I think we need to embrace. It's time we embrace the middle grades, and it's time we say we know what we need, what needs to be done. We need to do it. It's plain. I mean, to me, it's plain and simple. I don't know how you go about doing that because I'm not a policy person that can change the opinions of the general public about this. But I just become very discouraged when I see school systems giving up on the middle school concept, and I see teacher after teacher after teacher. One of the questions we asked in the interview protocol was, do you know the professional development that you can receive in the professional organizations that exist in your field? And out of 63 teachers who were interviewed, only 2 could tell me the National Middle School Association. That's pretty sad. That is very, very sad.
I would, you posed the question, Vince, of, what is one way to change the perceptions of the public, and certainly that's a challenging thing to do, although we're seeing people battle it out nightly in debates, aren't we? So I'm wondering, my perspective is that our best advocates for parental buy-in are parents themselves, and that's really what we've experienced. The schools that I've worked with, a number of them have multi-age teams, which have the benefit of having the same parents over time, with new parents joining, new kids joining, and therefore their families becoming a part of that school community. And they actually pair up parents. So you've got a more you have a parent who's had a child who's been on that team for several years, pairing up with a new parent to come in who explains the processes and says this is why we do things the way we do, those types of things. And you'd be surprised at how powerful a mechanism that is. And just the other piece would be that let's not forget about the kids themselves in terms of changing public perception, because I think they have tremendous power to do so. And as a parent, I'll tell you, if my child comes home happy, I think something's going on, something good is going on at school. Mm-hmm. That counts for a lot for me.
So some of the change is very tangible. I was talking to a billionaire business person who said, 10 years ago, he'd get people out of the best business schools in the country, and they could tell you every stock price from the top 40 companies from that morning. And any 7-year-old with an iPod can do that now. He said it's worthless. It's a worthless skill. It used to be valued, and now it's not. He needs people who can see where the puck is going, who can do pattern recognition, data reduction. So that's a very tangible change in terms of the workplace, the society, the world is going to reward very different skills because of the incredible ease of access to facts and figures. And that's a very tangible. I haven't seen the education system adapt, as abruptly to that. And also the whole notion of sort of keeping score. How do we know whether the changes are good or bad in terms of it's a non-trivial question. Do we want students to be smart? Do we want them to be happy? Do we want them to be good citizens? Do we want them to be compliant, rebellious, politically correct? There's not, and it matters because if we don't know, what we're shooting for, that could guide the specifics of the interventions. So that's one area that I found surprisingly difficult when we're trying to sort of see whether the digital revolution is good or bad, and it sounds like an obvious sort of thing to be able to find out, but what do we mean by good and bad? What what is the end game that we're trying to get for? And the question regarding arts and the brain is fascinating as well. And there's this sort of false belief that there's somehow the odds and emotion are somehow at odds with other intellectual pursuits. But that's completely against brain biology. I mean, the emotions, the art, and that's how our brain keeps score. That's what motivates us. That's how we know this is something important to me. This is salient. And I'm not sure where the idea started to sort of separate them, and that this late maturing front part of our brain overrides, our emotion, the art. It's completely wrong. They're incredibly integrated. They're inseparable. That's the whole idea in terms of this dynamic relationship of why the non-art pursuits are because of art in terms of they're inseparable. Just trying to get a biology perspective on some of these issues.
I think Patrick has a question.
So, I'm Patrick Tolan. I'm at Youth-Nex Center. So a couple of comments. One, and then leads to a question. So one is that we have, I think, 3 talks that are about processes of how we teach, how we learn, how do we engage, or how brain development might be affecting that. Each of which talked about sort of the rapidity of change and what it is that are important skills and what people need to know. Things that might even suggest that younger generation is probably more in tune with what are the coming skills and needs than are the people who are quote unquote teaching. So first thing is we kind of looked at processes rather than having somebody say, here's how you design a curriculum for middle school. Here's how what are the curriculum goals for middle school? And then we have this idea that really what we're talking about here is a rapid shift in the kinds of skills that are going to be important and so then my question is, how do you think that early adolescent brain development, that early adolescent, the implication of this for adolescent development, this ability to be engaged with social media in a way, how do you think that should be related to the goals we have for curriculum in middle school? I'll try it another way. If you were a middle school teacher, how would you design a curriculum that really takes this stuff and yet accomplishes social studies goals?
I think one aspect goes back to this sort of keeping score notion in terms of we sort of talk about whether to embrace the digital technologies or to ignore them. And I think that's kind of the not the best way to frame it, because it's not like we're passive bystanders in this. I think what we need to do is to harness it, to find out what works, what helps kids learn, what doesn't work as well. And it doesn't seem like there's very many resources or efforts gauged toward that in terms of how do we know what the right amount of class duration is. Is it 90 minutes, or is it 17 minutes like the TED Talks? Which is more effective, which is more brain friendly. I'll tell you which one is more brain friendly, the shorter times. But surprisingly little effort that I'm aware of in terms of figuring it out, in terms of systematically seeing what's the most effective and what's not as effective for this. I think it's hard to take that leap in terms to dramatically change instruction, but I think when people have looked at incorporating the Khan Academy or TED Talks in, it's really powerful mechanisms.
I guess I think the question's quite political in that I think a lot of teachers would say that they don't have the power to actually decide what to teach, that the curriculum is no longer in their purview. As we watch state standards and grade expectations and now the Common Core decide on what's important to know and what's important to be able to do. But that aside, I think there are lots of ways to negotiate curriculum with kids. And one of the points I was trying to make earlier is how important the student voice is in that whole endeavor of education. I know of one team, for example, in our state that spends the first 3 weeks of school negotiating curriculum with kids. They plan out what they're going to learn for the year and how they're going to learn it, and then they sort of backwards link it to standards. I'm not saying every school should be should take that approach, and it certainly wouldn't work in every community, but I think that kids are sorely underutilized in terms of identifying what matters to them, what they find to be relevant, and what instruction they're going to find to be suitable for them or to work best for them. And just one quick comment about your comment earlier that about sort of harnessing the digital revolution, if you will. I think it's, whether it's good or bad, it's here to stay. So it's almost a moot point. But I also used to think about it in terms of harnessing, and what I've kind of come to realize in my own head now, at least with a lot of the schools I see, is that we don't let kids spend a lot of time on technology. We tell them to power down their phones. They have incredibly powerful computers in their pockets that they're not allowed to use or even to bring to school. So I'm starting to think about it more as unleashing than harnessing, because we got to get it out there.
In answer to your question, or maybe it's a roundabout way of answering your question, the chart that I showed you guys before that you had on your tables talks about a curriculum that's integrative, so social studies is not sort of completely in its silo of social studies, or math in its silo of math, but it's integrative, it's relevant, it's rigorous, it's all of those things. It's based in a real life context. So, how do we approach curriculum for middle school students to make their curriculum relevant to what they're doing, to what they see their lives becoming? How do we make it challenging? How do we make it integrative? And I don't know about, we've had a talk this morning about colleges of education and teacher preparation programs, but we don't spend a lot of times, yes, I'm in ed leadership, but I do teach in the middle school program. We don't spend a lot of time teaching teachers to be about how to integrate their curriculum, how math and science and social studies and language arts can be meaningfully put together into a thematic unit or in other ways. We don't spend a lot of time doing that, and that's an indictment against myself, against my university, and it's something that we need to address. But it gets back to this issue of silos. We're all like in our little silos and we don't talk to each other, and we don't work with each other, and the meaningful connections are not made between the partners that are ultimately responsible for educating young adolescents. So I'm a social studies teacher, or I'm a math teacher.
We have time for one final question.
Can you all hear me? I actually love middle school students, but my observation has been in going into middle school that seems to be a time when kids, for a number of reasons, some of which are developmental, I'm sure, and social, really turn off at school and are not often allowed to act like middle school students should be able to act, so they get in trouble, and then they start hating to go to school, because who wants to go to school when you get in trouble every day? And so I'm wondering about the link between making middle schools developmentally appropriate for that age group and dropout rates in high school. Thanks.
I'll jump in. I think you raise a really important point. Certainly there's been a fair amount of relatively recent research suggesting a very strong connection between sort of middle school success and dropout rates. Balfance's work in particular, for example, demonstrates the 4 predictors that can predict up to 40% of high school dropouts based on some of their 6th grade data, and I think that can be really illuminating, and it's a strong reminder to us of how critical those times are. I guess I would also say that I agree. I think more and more our middle schoolers aren't allowed to act like young adolescents in school. I think as we have watched high stakes testing continue to infringe upon the schools, that we see no recess time, limited lunch time, very little kinesthetic opportunity. It's no wonder that they're getting in trouble when they aren't allowed to have any sort of movement, and that's perhaps most worrisome to me. Yeah.
I agree.
All right, well, thank you so much to the panel. Please join me in thanking them for these great